But the problem with the CDP space in the past, just being completely transparent, is that a lot of times you were looking at a year-long implementation and millions of dollars. And so a lot of companies were afraid to make that huge investment, or they made that huge investment and then by the time they were done, they forgot why they even did it in the first place. And so the cool part about composability and working in a warehouse native world is that you literally already have the data. It is just a matter of activating it. And so an implementation of a composable CDP is very quick because you're just mapping to the tables and columns you already have. So you could spin up use cases in a matter of days or weeks with low investment, and you can prove that it actually works instead of buying a multi-million-dollar package and crossing your fingers that in 2 years you're going to get value from it.
Hello and welcome to Best Story Wins. Today, our guest is Adam Greco of Hightouch. Hey, Adam. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Hey, Adam.
Yeah, likewise. For people that might not be familiar yet with Hightouch, could you please just give us a quick overview of what the company does and then also speak a bit about what you do there at the company?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Yeah, so I work for Hightouch, which is a startup based in San Francisco. And we are a customer data platform company, but also getting into AI, doing what we call AI decisioning. And so our big claim to fame is that we invented or created the category of composable CDP, which is a new way of doing customer data platforms where you actually work in a warehouse native approach so that you don't actually store any data in the customer data platform, but you leverage all of the data that you've been storing in cloud warehouses like Snowflake, Databricks, and so on. My role at the company is a kind of a strange one. I'm a product evangelist. So I spend a lot of my time educating the market on what's happening in the data space, in the CDP space. My background is in the data space for the last 25, 30 years. I was one of the early employees at a company called Omniture, which was an analytics tool that got bought by Adobe. I worked at Salesforce. I worked at a startup called Amplitude. And so I spend a lot of my time writing blog posts, speaking at conferences, and doing talks like this, and really just educating the market on what's happening and also letting them know about Hightouch since we're a relatively new company in the grand scheme of things.
It's awesome. It's funny that you have to explain Omniture these days.
I know. I feel really old because not many people these days know of Omniture.
Well, it was obviously like a legendary story, and you yourself are a legend in the analytics world, but you've made a jump from digital analytics to data activation. And love for you to unpack that and also what made you bet on this space and just what clicked for you that composable CDP was interesting and was going to matter and led you to go big on this.
Yeah, it definitely was a big shift. And I think I freaked a couple people out after doing digital analytics for so long. I wrote the book on Adobe Analytics and so on. But I really do believe that we're moving into a different era right now. And while I loved the digital analytics space and was there for so long, and I think it adds real value, I think the customers now are expecting even more and better experiences. And when you're doing analysis or looking at data that happens on websites and mobile apps, that's really important. But also you need to look at all of the customer data. And for years, people have been talking about kind of the BS term of, customer 360 or 360-degree view of the customer. And it was never really possible. But I do believe that we're starting to get to the point where it might be possible because all of that customer data is starting to move towards these cloud warehouses. It used to be locked in internal databases, and some was in Salesforce, some was in Adobe. But now more and more companies are realizing that even if they use tools like Salesforce and Adobe, they're storing a version of that data in the cloud warehouses. And the reason I was willing to kind of make this jump is because I've been somewhat pretty good in my career at kind of seeing where things are going. And for hockey players, they always say like skating to where the puck is going. And I think that 5 years from now, most companies are going to have standardized on one of these cloud warehouses, but they're still going to need to be able to build audiences on their customers, identify, do identity resolution to figure out, is these 5 email addresses, are these all Adam or are they 2 different people? And then be able to take audiences of people and do ads and emails and so on. And so I think this is a massive shift, almost like when the world went from desktop to mobile. I think moving from the idea of internal warehouses to cloud warehouses and then having to activate on that is going to be huge. And then AI only makes it more interesting because AI is only as good as the data that it can see. And so if you have your customer data locked away or spread across multiple different sources, then your AI is going to hallucinate and you're going to not be able to take full advantage of AI. So that's what drew me to this space. And then Hightouch, they were the leaders in this space and they started the whole category. And to me, it was really fascinating. The founders came from Segment, which was a very popular company and was bought by Twilio. But the 3 founders are, super, super smart people, super young, super energetic. And as an old guy like me, being able to kind of go work at a company like that, I feel like in some way keeps me young.
So CDP and data activation is a phrase that you're hearing more and more these days, especially if you're familiar with this space. As a little experiment, I just dropped it into Google and you all show up first or second, which I thought was pretty cool. It's one of those phrases that also just kind of sounds great, but not everyone understands what it means. With respect to, your Hightouch POV, how do you make that phrase, that idea, something that's a little bit more relatable to the less technical person, maybe your average marketer or someone on the GTM team?
Yeah. And it's a real problem. I think the CDP space in general and activation has kind of had a weird reputation because it's been around for a while. And a lot of people 10 years ago, it was like the hot thing, but then people spent a lot of money on it and it was questionable what results they got. But I think what I like to do to make it a little bit different is to break it down into actual practical use cases. And I think the companies that we're working with right now have kind of already been through, I'll say, like the hype phase of CDP. And now they're in the like roll up our sleeves and actually find a way to get something practical. And so what we spend a lot of time with our customers and even companies who aren't customers yet is we basically kind of just talk to them about, where is your customer experience like having issues? Like, for example, if someone adds something to the shopping cart, but they don't purchase, like how often are you able to market to them to get them to come back and buy that thing and know if they bought it in the store or if they didn't and so on. And I think coming up with tactical, tangible use cases is really powerful. But the problem with the CDP space in the past, just being completely transparent, is that a lot of times you were looking at a year-long implementation and millions of dollars. And so a lot of companies were afraid to like make that huge investment, or they made that huge investment. And then by the time they were done, they forgot why they even did it in the first place. And so the cool part about composability and working in a warehouse native world is that you literally already have the data. It is just a matter of activating it. And so an implementation of a composable CDP is very quick because you're just mapping to the tables and columns you already have. So you could spin up use cases in a matter of days or weeks with low investment, and you can prove that it actually works instead of buying a multi-million-dollar package and crossing your fingers that in 2 years you're going to get value from it.
That's really fascinating. And so a lot of companies talk about being data driven, but the truth is most aren't. And I think there's a variety of blockers or things that could come up that prevent even people who want to be from being more data driven. But what do you see as the biggest misconception in how companies try and fail to actually activate their data?
Yeah, data driven is a tough word because I think that everyone says that they want to be data driven, especially executives. But my experience is that they want data that's going to support their gut instincts instead. They want to just have a way to say, yeah, I was right, and here's the data that shows I'm right. And I also don't think that organizations should become slaves to their data and, become robots. And that scares me a little bit in the AI world. But I think in general, what I've seen is that to be data driven, you have to have one agreed upon trustworthy set of data. And where most companies that I work with get in trouble is they have, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit of data here, a little bit of data there, a little bit of data in all these different places. And they just can't really take advantage of it. And I'll give you an example. Is I was talking to a company a couple of weeks ago, and their story was someone came to their website, they added a product to the cart, but they couldn't check out. It was either a credit card problem or something, but they got an error message, and that person submitted a ticket that said, I'm trying to buy something, but I went to your help, and can someone help me? I cannot buy your product. Well, that was in the support system. And then that person over the next week started getting emails that said, why didn't you finish buying this product? And then maybe an ad on Facebook that said, would you like to buy this product? And the company was not only wasting money and effort, but they were really pissing off this customer because the support data wasn't connected to the customer experience data. And if they would have just been able to use a product like ours to bring it all together to say, we definitely do want to market to people who add to cart and don't purchase, but before we send them an email or an ad, we want to exclude anyone that either bought in store or has a support ticket. If they would have done that one last little step, then they would have been much more data driven and they would have had a much more pleasurable experience with the customer. But instead, they were actually using data incorrectly and they were making a worse customer experience for the customer because they were basically doing the equivalent of, hey, look, boink, I want to buy your product, but you won't let me. And I think that's the problem that a lot of companies are working on right now is how do we just get that one set of data? And that's why these cloud warehouses are becoming so popular.
So you're all punching pretty well above your weight in a market that's full of a lot of really big name, big incumbents. What's one thing that you've done on the marketing side that's felt like a cheat code or maybe another way of framing that is what's something that surprised even you in terms of how well it's worked out?
Yeah, it's definitely tough. It's funny when I talk to people about our company, they think we have 5,000 employees and we're barely over 200 employees, but we are competing with companies that have, 50,000, 40,000 employees. So it's definitely tough. There's a couple of things that I've learned, and a couple of these things I have to be transparent predated me at Hightouch, but in the early days of Hightouch, they were pretty bold in the content that they put out there. They had a very bold campaign, which was called Friends Don't Let Friends Buy a CDP. And it's kind of weird because they were a CDP vendor saying that you shouldn't buy a CDP, but their point was that the old fashioned CDPs are not the way to do it. You got to go to this new composable approach. And, I'm sure it pissed off some of the incumbents like Adobe and Salesforce, but it got their name out there. And I think that we put a lot of educational content out there. If you look at SEO, and now we're trying to figure out how we deal with the world of GEO, but basically we put so much educational content out there, especially when you build a new category, you really have to work hard at it. I myself have been here now 6 months and I've already put 23 blog posts out there. And I think that's the cheat code is you have to give in order to get. You have to educate them on what's happening in the market. Now, they always assume that you're biased because everyone assumes that when you work at a vendor, you're biased. But the more you could put content out that is real and it's authentic and it's true, even if it may be a little bit more biased towards your vendor, like that helps. And I've seen in the last 6 months that companies who've never heard of Hightouch, they'll read one of my blog posts and then they'll start seeing the name over and over again. And then they'll inquire, like, can you explain to me what Hightouch does? So I think the cheat code is you got to play bigger than you are. You got to be bold. And it's okay to put things out there that might be a little controversial as long as you can back it up. And as long as you can say, like, listen, we've spoken to a lot of customers and this is what they're telling us. You may not like what you're hearing, but this is what we're seeing. And so I think you just got to be a little bit bold at times and not be afraid to piss people off. And there will be people that get pissed off, but that's okay.
It's a great perspective. And in this, you're speaking to both marketers and data people who often want different things, right? How do you keep this message sharp and get it out there without diluting the message to try to either, find only the overlap between those two audiences, or otherwise distilling down to something so simple for the sake of reach?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge because the CDP space is inherently fraught because you're always selling to two different teams at a company. And I'll just broaden this out because not everyone listening to this cares about CDP. But in our case, we're working with data teams and marketing teams. Those are the two teams we kind of interact with the most. Now, marketers in general, they love shiny objects. They just want something that looks really cool, really snazzy. And if they want to be able to, do a campaign or run a chart or report, they just want it to be really, cool. The data teams are kind of rolling up their sleeves and dealing with, data schemas and quality assurance and governance and all this stuff. And so they each have different needs. What I've always found is powerful, and I had the same situation when I was working at Amplitude, is you want to be the organization that is bringing these two teams together instead of pitting them against each other. So like in the Hightouch example, we help marketers achieve what they want to achieve by using the work the data team has already done, instead of the marketing team going off and buying a packaged legacy CDP that they own and basically bypassing the data team so that there's two different kind of sources of truth. And so that if you're a marketer and you do that, you end up pissing off your data team, and the data team's like, why are we spending money? And there's more security risks, all those things. But if we come in and say, how would the marketing team like to get what they need, but with the work that the data team's already done, and bring marketing and data together, then they're happier and they both start to collaborate. And it's interesting. Sometimes when I was at Amplitude and here at Hightouch, it's the first time that the marketing team and the data team have really spent a lot of time working together. And in the end, I think that's beneficial for both those teams. And so that's the hard part. I wish we worked in a world where there was just one ICP, like we only had to talk to marketers. That would be infinitely easier. But most companies out there, if you're on the vendor side, you oftentimes do have to talk to different groups. And you've got to figure out their motivations and how you can get them to collaborate, because otherwise one of them is going to hate you.
Yeah. So even though there's multiple larger incumbents in this space, you're all participating together in category creation, and you're playing an active role there in shaping the category. What's something that over the years you've learned about category creation and building a category shaping narrative that some marketers might miss?
Yeah, category creation is a bear. It's really tough, but you do need a category in order to have a mental model. If you've ever seen the Scott Brinker and friends chart of all of the different MarTech tools, like you could go crazy if you don't have a mental model to group vendors together. And when I first started in my career, CRM was a new category. Web analytics was a new category. And what a lot of people nowadays don't realize is, like, if you mention web analytics or digital analytics, as it's now called, like everyone just assumes that's a thing. But that wasn't a thing 20 years ago. We had to create that category. And so I think that with category creation, first of all, you should only create a category if it's truly different. And like when we created a composable CDP category, we felt that this was different enough that there was a line that had to be drawn between kind of a non-composable where you send data to a package solution versus a composable where you work off a warehouse and you can choose which features you want to use and pay for. We felt that was different enough that it was worth the effort. Right now, Hightouch is also trying to create a second category called AI decisioning. And it's really difficult because everyone is talking about AI, but what is AI decisioning? What is the value that it brings? How's that used in real life? So this is something that we just love to do because we're really good at educating people. But I think the hard part about category creation is that at first people will look at your new category and say, that's nothing, that's stupid, that they're being crazy, don't look over there. And then eventually, once the category does take off, then you have this other phenomenon where the legacy vendors will come in and say, oh, yeah, we told you 2 years ago that new category was stupid, but now we are the leader in that new category. And I think there's a lot of incumbents that try to market themselves as being able to do the old way and the new way, but they really can't do the new way, but they can just put out marketing materials. And then they do that as a way to kind of squash this new category so that they can keep their incumbent monopoly status. And I'm a big fan. I read a book in the late 90s called The Innovator's Dilemma, which is one of my favorite books. And I'd highly recommend that people check that out or at least watch some videos about that. And it talks about how new things come around and how old legacy vendors have to either destroy themselves or they could be destroyed by these new innovators. But that's the fun part, is if you're just going to be another vendor in an established category, then how are you really that different? And last thing I'll say is, like, when I joined Amplitude, we were a product analytics company competing with marketing or digital analytics companies. And one of the things that drew me to Amplitude is I said, let's do something different. Let's actually do product analytics and let's do marketing analytics, which already existed, but let's also do experience analytics. And the combination of those three disciplines helped us to create kind of like a new category, a analytics tool that could do multiple disciplines. And that ended up being our biggest differentiator from those that either did just product analytics or just marketing analytics or just experience analytics.
And so you've been in this ecosystem long enough to see a lot of like truly transformational changes, and then also a lot of shiny trends that have come and gone. What are the signals you look at to know when something actually is transformative and truly impactful versus just a repackaged acronym or buzzword describing the same old thing?
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of buzzwords. I think in my time, the biggest one was big data. For a number of years, everything was big data this, big data that. I think the way I look at the litmus test is, are you seeing practical use cases in software products based on the term? I can't tell you how many presentations I saw at conferences that talked about big data, machine learning, doing all these great modeling, but very few software products actually had something that incorporated big data into their product. The minute that it stops being just on slides and people start investing in building software and users start using that software, that's when I feel like it's crossed over from not just being a buzzword, but being something real. And I think obviously the biggest example of that today is AI. So for the last year or so, AI has been very buzzy. It's been on a lot of presentations. It's been added to every company logo, every company mission statement. But how much has AI actually been incorporated into products is different. And so like at Hightouch, we were really big on AI, but instead of like hyping it, we built a product that said, hey, you're used to sending emails to thousands of people and each of them are getting the same email. What if we could do messaging one-to-one using all the warehouse data? That's what we think of as AI decisioning. And we built a product so that you could actually see AI, in this case, reinforcement learning, in action, and you could see the tangible results of AI. I think we're starting to see that OpenAI was like a really big thing, but now that they're coming out with a browser, like now you're going to start to really see a practical use of AI. And we're starting to see with MCP or, model context protocols that we're actually starting to see templates that people can use to get different systems to work together. And now you're starting to see that AI is moving away from that buzz into something real and tangible. I like to be able to touch and feel something on my keyboard. Then I know it's not just buzz anymore.
So Hightouch is becoming a go-to name for modern data stack conversations. And I imagine that hitting that level required building a lot of trust amongst, potential customers. So how do you approach building trust through your content creation? And where do you think most brands get that wrong, the building of trust?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think because we sit in the middle of the tech stack, just by the nature of our product, we're generally sending data back and forth between systems and sending audiences of users between systems. We spend a lot of time with customers in Miro. We literally pull up Miros and get all of their vendors they're using. They show us the diagram of how they're kind of currently connecting them. And so here we come in and we're a small startup a couple years old, and we're saying, we are going to be the glue that connects all of these things in your modern data stack, and you should trust us. And that's hard for some companies when they're like, we'd rather just give all of our, just to use one vendor like Salesforce for everything. And, they've been around for 20 years. But I think what we're seeing is that because in our particular case, we don't actually store any data in our system because we're relying on the warehouse, we are really kind of in many cases pipes between these different systems. So we are pipes between systems that they already trust. They have to just trust that we are going to be the best way to get data between these different pipes. And then if they want to build audiences, that we have a UI that can do that. So in our particular case, it's really easy because we aren't storing data and they're using systems that they already use and they trust, and we're just this glue. Plus, we happen to have lots of amazing customers, even though we're a relatively young company, huge brand names. But I think the bigger question is, and I wrote a blog post about this, is it's really easy to say, I'm nervous about kind of where the modern data stack is going, and I just want to go with one vendor for everything. Kind of use someone who's been around for a long time. The blog post that I wrote was kind of interesting. Is I titled it is sometimes the riskier move or the safer move is actually riskier, because yes, you might be able to go with one vendor that doesn't have like the most up-to-date technology and you have one kind of throat to choke. But what if going with that one vendor means that your competitors are using data more effectively than you, building better customer experiences, out innovating you, having better experiences than you are with your customers? And nowadays in the digital world, every customer is literally a couple clicks away from a competitor. So I think you have to weigh the safety. And kind of, I think most people are risk averse. If you're a big Kahneman economics fan, that more people are afraid of losing money than they are at the opportunity of winning money. And so I think a lot of people are naturally risk averse. And I think the bigger the company, the more risk averse they are. But we're seeing more and more that people realize how important customers are and customer data is, and that this is not an area they want to play it safe. They want to be able to really capitalize on that customer data. And if that means, working with a couple different vendors, they want to work a lot of times with best of breed vendors. And again, it's not for everyone, but this is the trend that we're seeing, is that more and more companies are moving to these cloud warehouses and building this modern data stack. And it's really, for us, a lot of times it's just using our technology and seeing that it works to build that trust.
So you do a good job. We touched on this a little bit in, how you bridge the gap between the analyst and marketer, or the data engineer and marketer. But you generally make a lot of fairly technical concepts feel very accessible, but you don't do it in a way that makes things feel generic. So what's your playbook for translating that complexity without dumbing it down or sounding like everyone else?
It's kind of a blessing and a curse. I've written probably about 400 blog posts and a book in my lifetime. And first of all, it helps if you like to write. I actually enjoy writing. To me, it's like cathartic. But I think the key advantage that I have is that I'm not super, super technical. I've always been technical enough, whether it was in, coding for digital analytics, now in CDP. Like, I've always been dangerous, like technical enough I can understand things, but not so technical that I can't explain things to people who are non-technical. And so the nice part is that I have the ability to read what I'm putting out and say, does this make sense to me? Because I'm kind of the typical buyer. I used to actually be a digital marketer, so I kind of know that role. I've fluctuated my career from being at the client side to consulting to being on the vendor side. I've kind of worn all hats. And so I think sometimes people who are too technical, they write too technical, and people who aren't technical at all, they write very generically. And so I happen to just be in that nice sweet spot. And I think that when I write, my goal is to provide a concept and maybe provide some practical examples and to try to convince them of an argument or a story, instead of trying to be like convince them that, this is the right syntax to write a thing. So I think it is an art. And I see a lot of people that fall in the super, super technical, super, super generic. and aren't in that sweet spot. But most of the people don't have time to read technical things. And if they want to read technical stuff, they'll do that more in like technical documentation versus a blog.
So you've had a front row seat to how data and marketing have evolved for over 2 decades. What's one thing that marketers used to be great at that we've all somehow forgotten?
Yeah, I feel a little guilty about this because I think the thing that I would say is how much marketing is happening digitally and online. And I'm kind of part of the problem because I worked in digital analytics and ran websites. But I think I'm old enough to remember the days when you used to do marketing and sales in person. And there's something about being in a room with someone and talking about either, a project you're consulting on or a product you're trying to explain to them as a vendor, and being able to like write stuff on a whiteboard and see their faces and read their face. And it's just a little different in a digital world, in Zoom when you're working with people, or trying to understand how your customers are feeling about what you're saying to them or your website or mobile app by just looking at what they click. And digital analytics, which I've always been a big proponent of, is a great way to do that because you can look at their path flows. You could even use session replay and watch them using your website. But it doesn't replace, if you're in a store, an associate comes up to you and says, "Hey, can I help you like figure out what's the right TV that you want to buy?" And just being able to market the different TV models versus like looking at feature comparison on Amazon.com. So I think that's what I feel like. We used to be really good at building relationships and convincing people and understanding what was important to them. And now that everything has gone digital, I feel like we're missing out a little bit. And we've always been trying to get back to that. But maybe AI will make that more conversational again. So it'll maybe blend the best of both worlds. But that's been something that's frustrated me. And I think in general, by having to market to and listen to your customers digitally, it makes everything complicated because it's like, instead of saying, which TV do you think Adam should buy? You're looking at all of the pages that Adam clicked at all the different TVs. And then you're trying to use an analysis to see how much time you spend on this TV versus this one. And then you're doing an A/B test to figure out, should he use this TV? It just, the whole thing has gotten so complicated. And I feel like in the old days, like when my parents' age, it was just like you walk in a store and, do you want this or do you want that? And I just think it's gotten overwhelming as a marketer.
Yeah, everyone's optimizing everything to a painful degree. So what's something that over the years, you mentioned being in the space for quite a while now and having been on every side of the table, what's a marketing idea or best practice that you used to believe in that you've maybe over the last couple of years decided to abandon or change your mind on?
Yeah. And I'll say, speaking for Adam, I can't speak for Hightouch because we still will do what I'm about to say, but I have become less and less enamored with search engine optimization and paid search on search engines. In the early days, it was actually pretty amazing that someone could go to a search engine and they might search for CRM tools and they could easily find a bunch of CRM tools, a bunch of articles written about CRM tools, and maybe there'd be 1 or 2 ads that someone's paying for to go check out. And you knew that that person was interested in CRM because they searched for that term. But I think over the years, people have figured out how to play the system and game it. And now the paid search results, it's really difficult to understand what is organic and what is paid. And now with AI coming out, a lot of times people are just ignoring the results and just looking at the summary. And so while companies like Hightouch and others are still using paid search, I long have soured on it because I think in many cases it's a pay to play. And for example, you might buy, if someone searches for your competitor, you could buy that word and then you show up there. And it just has a little bit of ickiness to it, but like everyone does it. So you kind of have to do it. So I would say that paid search, and I'm kind of actually looking forward to the day when paid search is gone and that SEO is gone, because I think that there's a better way to do it and have more authoritative content, not just what people are paying to kind of shove down your throat. So that's one that used to be, I used to make a lot of money by, getting people to come to my website through paid search. But nowadays, I don't think it's going to be around in the future.
So I will have to see. So what about conversely, like what's a marketing tactic or marketing campaign type or best practice that you weren't too keen on historically, but maybe recently you're like, actually, I like this. And I think this is where we should put more energy.
Yeah, I would probably say short form video is one that pops to mind. And again, since I'm really old, it's hard for me to relate and do this, but like my kids have been telling me like I need to start doing this. I'm not a TikTok person, but I do find myself getting sucked in to these short form videos. And even now, when going back to the Google search conversation, now they even have a new result type that's called short videos that shows you things on Instagram and TikTok. And I do think there is something to be said for being able to convey a message or a topic or a concept very quickly in a couple minutes with video. And I've done a couple tests where I'll write a blog post and I'll put it out there, and then I'll do the same blog post, but I'll put like a little kitschy video announcing the blog post, and those get a lot more engagement and a lot more people click on it. And I'm starting to see on LinkedIn a lot more videos coming in. So I think short form video is interesting. It's just sometimes it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, but it's one of those things that I'm thinking about. Do I start getting into myself? And I know that like our company Hightouch has been playing around with video a lot more.
And then what's something you've done at Hightouch that didn't get a lot of visibility or necessarily make a splash externally, but it was a big win behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think when I think about internal stuff, one of the things that jumps to my mind is, I don't know if you're familiar with a software called Gong, but for those who aren't familiar, Gong is a B2B software. It records, it works alongside with like a Zoom, and it records your meeting and it parses what people are saying, who says what. You can kind of take little snippets of it. It puts an AI transcript and you can search the transcript. And this has been a tool that I've used over the years that I've really loved. And it's not the sexiest thing because it's not like it's external marketing, but I'll tell you how I use it is I set up keyword alerts for different calls. And I can't listen to every call that happens with every customer, but part of my job as a product evangelist is to really keep a pulse of what's going on in the industry. So I set up certain keyword searches, and then I get alerted every day that says, hey, there were 3 calls that mentioned this phrase and 2 calls that mentioned this phrase. And I'll go in and it actually takes you right to the spot in the call where that phrase was mentioned. So I can get through like 20 calls in like an hour. And what it does is it allows me to, first of all, see what's going on in the industry. It gives me ideas for blog posts that I could write, but it also has a commenting functionality where I can actually comment. So if like a sales rep is explaining a topic and I think there may be some ways they can improve the way they're explaining it, I can mentor them right there and say, hey, you might want to say this right when the customer said that. And it's kind of like a very teachable moment because it's fresh in their mind. And so while externally that wouldn't make a big splash, internally every day that's helping me to educate my colleagues and coworkers so that they can tap into what I know, but also I can learn what they're saying to customers, and I can hear the problems that customers are having and come up with new ideas for how we could either solve it or talk about it. And in many cases, I find out that we are talking to a company and I happen to know someone at that company. So I can then reach out to that person, the company, and say, hey, I just happen to see we're talking to your company and we should hop on a call and we could talk about it. And so you could again bring that relationship back into it. So it's not considered a marketing tool, I would say, Gong, but I use it as an internal marketing tool, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's one of the more interesting applications I've heard of in terms of how people are leveraging Gong and its data. I know we're getting close to time here. If you had to sum up your philosophy on data and marketing in one sentence, I know that might be kind of complicated. What would it be?
That is hard. I would say that for better or for worse, we are now in a world where most of our customer interactions are going to take place digitally. And that still means you need to market. You just have to market in a different way. And you have to figure out, how do you listen to customers in a digital world? And oftentimes that is going to be through data. So how do you figure out how you can get all of the customer data possible so that you can listen as most effectively and then communicate back to the customers with the right message at the right time.
And then who do you think is doing this well? Like what company or even specific marketing team do you think is doing CDP and data activation right? And what do you think other people can learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of companies who are doing it wrong, but there are definitely some who are doing it right. A specific example I would think of maybe is like one of the clients that I think is most interesting that we have is PetSmart, because it's such a weird dilemma that you have as a marketer at PetSmart. Because if you think about it, you have a lot of different customers. You have, humans who have pets. A human might have multiple pets. Each pet you might buy different products for. And it's really difficult to figure out how the pet likes the products. I guess the human could tell you that. But I think it's kind of a weird model. And so when you're marketing to if you're PetSmart, you're marketing, are you marketing to maybe like the husband or the wife? And what if the husband has more of an affinity for the dog versus the cat? I mean, it's kind of a tricky thing. And so one of the things that we've been working with PetSmart on is they built out a really amazing data schema, and they understand the relationship between pet parents, pets, products, and the products can relate to parents and pets. And then how do you personalize? And so they've been actually one of the first companies that have used our AI decisioning product, because they just realized that this is really difficult to do with as many customers as they have, as many humans, as many pets. How do you personalize? And so they've been using our AI tool to basically look at all of the customer data, try lots of different offers, see what works and what doesn't work, and let the AI tell them that, hey, the more offers you push about grooming is really big with this one of your customers, but grooming may not be as big of a deal for the spouse. And so again, they really struggled to do that as a human, but then, as human marketers, but now using our AI decisioning tool, they've kind of got to set and forget it. And we actually have a video, I think, that just came out recently where they were just like, listen, it's nice. I don't need to have my marketing team create all these audiences anymore. We're basically letting AI build audiences of one and personalizing. And that's, to me, cutting edge. And what's nice about them is that they, instead of being afraid of AI and afraid of where the future is going, they're embracing it and saying, hey, we're willing to be on the cutting edge here because we want to try it. And they've had huge lifts in not only conversion rate, but also just what they're learning about each of their customers. And now they can have a much more detailed profile because AI is telling them which signals are working and which signals are not. So that's just one example, but there's so many out there.
Yeah, that's good. Adam, it's been awesome having you on. For people that want to learn more about you and find you online, potentially follow you, reach out, etc., where's the best place for them to do so?
Yeah, LinkedIn is where I live. They can follow me on LinkedIn. I've got a big network there. I also have a newsletter on LinkedIn with a couple thousand folks on it. So whenever I post a blog post, I always try to put it on the newsletter there. I haven't quite gone over to Substack yet because most of the people I interact with are on LinkedIn anyway. But yeah, LinkedIn is the best place. And if anyone wants to learn more about Hightouch, I'm happy to chat anytime. This is what I get paid to do, is to talk about the industry and talk about Hightouch. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great chatting with you.